The invitation arrived on premium paper with the logo of Derbez Entertainment in Boston gold. Special guest appearance on La Hora de la Verdad, where comedy meets reality, it read in elegant Spanish script. Karoline Leavitt stared at the invitation in her White House office, immediately recognizing the setup. Eugenio Derbez, Mexico's most famous comedian and actor, had built an empire on making people laugh. But lately his comedy had taken a political turn, and his targets were always the same: conservative politicians, traditional values, and anyone who supported border security. "It's obviously a trap," Emma, her communications director, said while reviewing the invitation details. "He's planning to make you the punchline in front of his massive audience. His show reaches 50 million people across Latin America." But Karoline was already researching. Something about Derbez's recent success felt too convenient. His production company had exploded in value over the past 3 years, securing massive deals with streaming platforms and expanding into multiple countries simultaneously. "Look at this," Karoline said, pulling up financial reports on her laptop. Derbez Entertainment went from a $5 million company to a $200 million empire in just 36 months. That's not organic growth. That's injection capital. Emma leaned over her shoulder. "What kind of injection capital?" "The kind that comes with strings attached," Karoline replied, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "His production company has received funding from shell corporations registered in Mexico, Colombia, and Panama. The same shell companies that the Treasury Department has flagged for suspicious financial activity. The more she dug, the clearer the picture became. Derbez's sudden expansion wasn't just about entertainment, it was about influence. Someone was paying him to have a platform, and they wanted that platform used for specific purposes. "He thinks he's going to humiliate me on national television," Karoline said, closing her laptop with a decisive snap. "But I've been preparing for this conversation longer than he realizes." She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder marked "Confidential DEA Financial Crimes." Inside were documents that would turn Derbez's comedy show into his worst nightmare. "Accept the invitation," she told Emma, "but make sure they agree to broadcast it live across all platforms. No delays, no editing." Emma looked concerned. "Are you sure about this? If you're wrong about whatever you think you found—" "I'm not wrong," Karoline interrupted, touching her silver cross necklace. "And it's time someone held these people accountable for using comedy as a cover for money laundering while pretending to be voices of the people." 3 days later, Karoline sat in the back of a black SUV heading toward Derbez's private studio complex in Los Angeles. The facility was impressive, a converted warehouse with multiple sound stages and a main theater designed to look like a Mexican cantina, complete with colorful decorations and mariachi music playing in the background. As she walked through the entrance, she could hear laughter and applause from the main studio. Derbez's team was everywhere: writers, producers, social media managers, all buzzing with the energy of people who believed they were about to witness a political takedown disguised as comedy. "Karoline!" Derbez's voice boomed as he emerged from his dressing room, arms spread wide in an exaggerated gesture of welcome. He was dressed in an expensive designer suit with a colorful Mexican flag pin on his lapel, his signature mustache perfectly groomed. "Welcome to my casa, mi amor," he said in heavily accented English, pulling her into an uncomfortably close embrace for the cameras that were already rolling behind-the-scenes footage. "Thank you for having me," Karoline replied professionally, noting how his team was positioning themselves to capture every angle of their interaction. "You ready for some real Mexican hospitality?" Derbez asked, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Because tonight, we're going to have some fun with La Politica Americana. See?" Karoline adjusted the leather folder under her arm and smiled back. "I'm looking forward to it. I brought some material of my own." The studio audience was packed with Derbez's loyal fans, many waving Mexican flags and holding signs with his catchphrases. The set was designed like a festive Mexican plaza, with bright colors, papel picado hanging from the ceiling, and a mariachi band in the corner. It was meant to feel welcoming and fun, but Karoline could sense the underlying hostility. "Bienvenidos a la Hora de la Verdad," Derbez announced to thunderous applause, speaking in rapid Spanish before switching to English. "Tonight we have a very special guest, the youngest White House press secretary in American history, and probably the most confused. The audience erupted in laughter. Karoline sat in the guest chair, wearing a navy blue blazer and her signature silver cross, looking professional and composed despite the hostile environment. "So, Karoline," Derbez began, his tone dripping with mock concern, "how does it feel to work for a man who wants to build a wall to keep out people like me?" It was exactly the kind of loaded question Karoline had expected. "I work for a president who believes in legal immigration and border security," she replied calmly. "The same policies that Mexico uses to protect its southern border with Guatemala." Derbez laughed theatrically, turning to his audience. "Did you hear that, amigos? She thinks Mexico is just like America." The crowd laughed and booed on cue. "Actually," Karoline said, opening her folder slightly, "I know quite a bit about Mexico, especially about how certain businesses operate there." Something in her tone made Derbez's smile flicker, but he pressed on with his prepared material. "You know, Karoline, in Mexico we have a saying, dime con quien andas y te diré quién eres. Tell me who you walk with, and I'll tell you who you are." "That's interesting," Karoline replied, her voice still pleasant but with an edge. "Because I've been wondering the same thing about you." She pulled a document from her folder. "Like who you've been walking with to fund your sudden expansion into streaming platforms in international markets." The audience murmured, sensing a shift in the dynamic. This wasn't going according to Derbez's script. "My business is very successful because people love to laugh," Derbez said, but his confidence was wavering. "Unlike some politicians who only know how to make people cry." "Speaking of your business," Karoline said, standing up from her chair, "let's talk about Entretenimiento Azteca Holdings, the shell company that's been funding your production deals." Derbez's face went pale beneath his stage makeup. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Really?" Karoline asked, pulling out a bank statement with highlighted transactions. "Because according to these financial records, your production company has received $75 million from Azteca Holdings over the past 2 years. Money that originated from accounts linked to the Sinaloa cartel's money laundering operations." The studio fell silent except for the hum of cameras. The mariachi band stopped playing. Even Derbez's most loyal fans looked confused and concerned. "You're lying," Derbez protested, but his voice cracked. "This is a comedy show, not a courtroom." "You're right," Karoline said, her voice rising for the first time. "This should be a comedy show. But there's nothing funny about taking blood money from drug dealers while pretending to be a voice for the Mexican people." She held up another document. "These wire transfers show payments from your company to Servicios Consultoría Guadalajara, a front company used by the cartels to pay for protection and political influence." The audience was now completely silent, watching their beloved comedian get systematically dismantled by documents and facts. Some were pulling out their phones to record, realizing they were witnessing something unprecedented. "The most disgusting part," Karoline continued, "is that you've been using your platform to mock law enforcement and border security, the same people trying to stop the criminals who are paying you." Derbez was now sweating visibly under the studio lights. His writers and producers were frantically making phone calls in the background, clearly trying to figure out how to contain this disaster. "You want to know who I walk with?" Karoline asked, turning to address the audience directly. "I walk with the families whose children have been killed by cartel violence. I walk with the honest Mexican Americans who are disgusted by criminals like you giving their culture a bad name." She pulled out one final document that made Derbez stumble backward. "And I walk with federal agents who have been investigating your money laundering operation for the past 18 months. The festive atmosphere of the studio had completely evaporated. The colorful decorations and mariachi music now seemed like props in a crime scene. Derbez stood frozen center stage, his comedian's mask completely shattered as Karoline methodically laid out evidence of his criminal connections. 18 months, Karoline repeated, spreading several documents across the coffee table between them. That's how long the DEA has been tracking money flowing from cartel operations through your entertainment empire. She held up a photograph that made several audience members gasp. This is you at a private party in Culiacan last year, standing next to Joaquin El Patron Herrera, the Sinaloa cartel's chief financial officer. The same man who signed the contracts funding your streaming deals. Derbez's legs seemed to give out. He sank into his host chair, his face ashen. I meet thousands of people at parties. I don't know who everyone is. Really? Karoline pulled out a transcript. Because according to intercepted phone conversations, you called him compadre and discussed expanding the business to clean more money through entertainment. The studio audience was in shock. Many of Derbez's fans were crying, realizing their beloved comedian was not who they thought he was. Others were angrily shouting questions, demanding explanations. The cartel didn't just give you money, Karoline continued, her voice cutting through the chaos. They gave you a mission. Use your comedy platform to undermine law enforcement, mock border security, and promote politicians who would be friendly to their operations. She pulled out another document. This is a contract between your production company and Medios Estratégicos Mexico, agreeing to produce content that portrays drug traffickers as folk heroes and law enforcement as villains. That's not true, Derbez protested weakly, but his voice had lost all its theatrical power. Isn't it? Karoline asked. She turned to address the cameras directly, speaking to the millions watching the live stream. How many of your comedy sketches have mocked DEA agents? How many times have you portrayed Border Patrol officers as bumbling fools? How many jokes have you made about drug dealers being smarter than police? The audience murmured as they realized the pattern. Derbez's comedy hadn't just been entertainment, it had been propaganda, carefully crafted to serve cartel interests. The most sickening part, Karoline said, her voice rising with genuine anger, is that you used the trust and love of the Mexican-American community to spread cartel propaganda. You took their pride in their culture and weaponized it for criminals. She held up a financial statement that made Derbez visibly flinch. Your production company has received $150 million in cartel money over 3 years, disguised as legitimate investments and advertising deals. Money that came from drug sales, human trafficking, and murder. The studio erupted in angry shouts as audience members realized the scope of the betrayal. Security guards moved to the edges of the set, clearly concerned about the crowd's reaction. You want to know what's really funny? Karoline asked, her voice dripping with contempt. While you were making jokes about American law enforcement, those same agents were building the case that's going to put you in prison for the rest of your life. Derbez's phone started buzzing frantically. His legal team, his agents, his business partners, everyone was trying to reach him as news of the live stream spread across social media and news outlets. The FBI raids on your properties in Los Angeles, Mexico City, and Guadalajara began 20 minutes ago, Karoline said, delivering a crushing blow. Your accountants, your business managers, and your cartel contacts are all being arrested as we speak. Derbez looked around desperately, as if searching for an escape route. His production team was in full panic mode, some trying to cut the live feed, others attempting to leave through emergency exits. You invited me here to humiliate me, Karoline said, gathering her documents. You thought you could make me look foolish in front of your audience. But the only fool here is someone who thought they could launder cartel money and never face consequences. The sound of sirens could be heard in the distance, growing closer. The mariachi band had long since fled, leaving only the hum of cameras and the angry murmur of a betrayed audience. This is what happens, Karoline said, looking directly into the main camera, when you mistake fame for immunity and laughter for loyalty. The people you betrayed trusted you with their culture, their pride, and their children's admiration, and you sold it all to drug dealers for money. The sirens were no longer distant. Federal agents in tactical gear burst through the studio doors just as the audience was beginning to turn hostile toward their former idol. The lead agent, a stern woman with FBI emblazoned across her vest, approached the set with practiced efficiency. Eugenio Gonzalez Derbez, she called out, using his full legal name. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit money laundering, racketeering, and providing material support to a criminal organization. Derbez didn't resist as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. He seemed to be in complete shock, staring at the cameras that were still broadcasting his arrest live to millions of viewers across the Americas. Agent Maria Santos, FBI Financial Crimes Division, the lead agent announced to the cameras, clearly understanding the international significance of this moment. This arrest is the culmination of a joint investigation with Mexican authorities into cartel money laundering through the entertainment industry. The studio had transformed from a comedy set into a crime scene. FBI agents were seizing computers, phones, and financial records while Derbez's production team was being questioned and, in several cases, arrested themselves. The evidence provided by the White House press secretary's office, Agent Sanos continued, was instrumental in completing our investigation into what we're calling the Comedy Cartel Network. Karoline remained standing calmly in the center of the chaos, still holding her folder of documents. She had known this moment was coming, but seeing it unfold live on international television was surreal. Mr. Derbez's entertainment empire was essentially a front for laundering approximately $300 million in drug money over the past 4 years, the agent explained to the cameras. The funds were disguised as legitimate production investments, advertising deals, and streaming platform contracts. As Derbez was being led away in handcuffs, he looked back at Karoline with a mixture of hatred and broken pride. "You destroyed my life. You destroyed everything I built." Karoline met his gaze without flinching. "You destroyed your own life the moment you decided to take blood money from drug dealers. I just made sure the world found out about it." "This is Agent Carlos Rodriguez from the DEA," another federal agent announced, approaching the cameras. "We want to assure the public that this investigation extends far beyond Mr. Derbez. We have identified at least 20 other entertainment figures who were part of this money laundering network." The revelation sent shockwaves through the live stream audience. Comments were flooding in from fans of other Mexican and Latin American entertainers, wondering if their favorite stars were also involved. "The scope of this operation was unprecedented," Agent Rodriguez continued. "The cartels were essentially buying influence in the entertainment industry, using popular comedians and actors to normalize criminal behavior and undermine law enforcement efforts." Derbez's manager, who had been coordinating the show from the control room, was now being questioned by federal agents. His computers had been seized, and investigators were already finding evidence of his involvement in the financial schemes. "The most disturbing aspect," Agent Santos added, "is how these criminals use the trust and cultural pride of the Latino community to further their illegal activities." Entertainers like Mr. Derbez were paid millions to influence public opinion in ways that would benefit cartel operations. As Derbez disappeared through the studio doors, surrounded by federal agents, the magnitude of what had just happened began to sink in. One of Latin America's most beloved comedians had just been arrested live on television, exposed by a 27-year-old press secretary who had simply done her homework. The live stream was still running, now showing federal agents cataloging evidence and interviewing witnesses. The viewer count had reached over 12 million people across all platforms, making it one of the most watched live events in Latin American media history. "There's something else the public should know," Karoline said, stepping forward to address the cameras one final time. "This investigation revealed that the cartel money wasn't just being laundered through comedy shows. It was being used to fund political campaigns, social media influence operations, and even children's programming across Latin America." She opened her folder one last time, revealing documents that would extend the investigation far beyond the entertainment industry. "The network we've uncovered reaches into politics, media, education, and business at the highest levels. And this is just the beginning." 18 months later, Karoline stood at the podium in the East Room of the White House, addressing a gathering of international law enforcement officials and media representatives. The investigation that had started with Derbez's arrest had grown into the largest entertainment industry corruption probe in Western Hemisphere history. "Operation Comedy Central has resulted in 89 arrests across 7 countries, she announced, reading from prepared remarks. "We've recovered over $1.2 billion in laundered drug money and dismantled a network that was systematically corrupting Latin American entertainment and media." The list of arrested celebrities and media figures read like a who's who of Latin entertainment. Comedians, actors, producers, television hosts, and even several prominent children's show creators. All had been using their platforms and business ventures to clean cartel money while building their public images as cultural ambassadors. "Most importantly," Karoline continued, "we've broken the cartel's ability to use popular culture as a weapon against law enforcement and democratic institutions across the Americas. A reporter from Televisa raised her hand. Ms. Levitt, critics say you unfairly targeted Mexican entertainers. How do you respond to accusations of cultural bias? Karoline's expression remained professional but firm. Corruption has no culture, no nationality, and no language. We followed the money and the evidence, not demographics. The investigation included entertainers and media figures from multiple countries who were participating in these criminal networks. What she didn't mention publicly was the ongoing security concerns. Since that day at Derbez's studio, Karoline had been living under enhanced federal protection. The cartels had placed a substantial bounty on her head, and several serious attempts had been made to harm her and her family. But the results spoke for themselves. Derbez was now serving a 35-year sentence in federal prison. His entertainment empire had been completely dismantled, his assets seized and sold, with the proceeds going to anti-drug programs and victim assistance funds across Mexico and Central America. There's something else I want to address, Karoline said, her voice taking on a more personal tone. That day, Eugenio Derbez tried to use his platform to humiliate me, to make me look foolish in front of his millions of fans. She paused, touching her silver cross necklace. But what he didn't understand is that when you stand for something real, when you have genuine principles, you can't be intimidated by fame, popularity, or cultural pressure. The crowd of officials and reporters leaned in, sensing that this was more than just a policy statement. The Latino community deserved better than what these criminals gave them, Karoline continued. They deserved entertainers who actually honored their culture instead of exploiting it for drug money. A young reporter from a Mexican-American newspaper stood up. Ms. Levitt, how do you think this investigation has changed the relationship between entertainment and law enforcement in Latin America? Karoline's expression brightened slightly. I think it's taught people that real cultural pride comes from integrity, not from protecting criminals just because they speak your language or share your heritage. She pulled out a letter written in Spanish by a young woman from Guadalajara whose community center had been built with recovered cartel money. This letter is from Sofia, age 22, from Mexico, Karoline read, translating as she went. She writes, "Thank you for showing us that our heroes should make us proud, not ashamed. Because of your courage, we now have programs that actually help our community instead of just pretending to care while helping criminals." Karoline folded the letter carefully. That's why we do this work. Not for headlines or political points, but for Sofia and thousands of young people like her who deserve role models with actual integrity. As the press conference ended, Karoline reflected on how much had changed since that confrontational day in Los Angeles. Derbez's comedy empire had crumbled, but something more important had been built in its place: accountability. The entertainment industry across Latin America had been forced to confront its role in money laundering and corruption. New international regulations required transparency in celebrity business ventures and production funding. And young people across the Americas had learned that their cultural heroes should be judged by their character, not their fame. Most importantly, the investigation had sent a clear message to criminal organizations. Using popular culture and ethnic pride to launder money and influence politics would no longer be tolerated, regardless of how beloved or culturally significant the perpetrators might be.